Okay, so when I was coming up with this demo and I was told we were going to be back in hybrid format and out of the dark ages, the troubles are over, people are going to pile in. I called John and I said, "Hey John, let's do something. I'm sick of watching demos." That's what I think I said. "I'm sick of watching demos and I'm the president of Keystone. So me and Mark and a few other and Mike as the photographer, cinematographer, a videographer, run those meetings." And I said, I'm sick of I'm sick of running a television show. I'm sick of hosting a television show, and I'm sick of watching television shows. So I suggested that we would do an interactive demo. And that means that someone here or several people here are going to come up and turn while I tell you what to do. And I said, "John, will that work?" And he said, "Oh, we've got a ton of people who would love to do that. And there are only 12 of us here tonight, and 4 of us are from Keystone. So are there any volunteers?" It's easy. It's easy turning. Straight line stuff. No beads, no coves, no nothing. Good. So we got Barry. So Barry's one. And by the time you see how much fun Barry's having, you'll be the next volunteer. So we'll see if we can get 3. That's my goal. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to make, well, what Barry's going to make, because that would defeat the purpose of the surprise. But I am going to tell you that it has to do with movement of wood. And there is this great book, which I just found out tonight. I bought this thing, I don't know, 10 months ago. And I just found out tonight that the editor of this bad boy is sitting right over here. Wave to the people, John. John in his inimitable wisdom. And so the problem with that is I Xerox copied stuff from the book. So, you already paid. You don't get residuals?
Not at all.
Okay, perfect. It's good. That's good. So y'all got a handout and there's no lawsuits that are going to happen. That works perfectly. I don't usually believe in handouts because I find them pointless, quite frankly. If the project is done well in front of me, what's the point of the handout? Unless Barry has plans for one of his jigs, then I want the handout with dimensions and cost, the lumber cut up into cost. But what I do think, this is a great book. So it's called Understanding Wood, and you should own it if you care at all about wood and you don't have it. You should go on Amazon or wherever you can, bookseller near you, and buy it. I can't remember what it costs, but it's been worth every penny. It's one of those books you just keep going back to all the time. And I only copied you 3 pages because what we're working with tonight is a turning that is going to take advantage of what's called the tangential shrink of the wood. And so I'm going to explain that. So this is a long piece of lumber, and this is the end. Okay. Or in our case, it's a ring cut out of a tree, slice of a ring cut out of a tree, and one of these tall stacks. So you can think of it that way. Okay. The grain orientation is this way. Tangential shrink is the distance when this green piece dries, the distance that this piece shrinks. Okay. There's a formula. It's 10% of something, and I'm not going to remember it, but you have a page right here that will tell you what that is. So you can look at it that way. Radial, and the reason it's called tangential shrink is because it's the shrink against the tangent of the growth rings. Okay, so the tangent being a 90-degree angle to the growth rings, right? So it's this kind of shrink, not radial shrink, which is the shrink across the face here, right? Because this is the radius of those rings, right? So this would be the radius of the rings. So if that shrinks, that's radial shrink. If this shrinks this way, it would be tangential shrink on each quarter, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to take advantage of tangential shrink in, what's interesting is there was a big discussion during the break about different kinds of hickory. We're going to use shagbark hickory to take advantage of this tangential shrink. And if you look on page 2 of your handout, and those of you at home, I'll have John or somebody, I'll send you a copy of this and you can forward it on to people, or buy the book Understanding Wood and go to page 116 and you'll have the information. That's probably a better, I'm not sending a PDF of a handout. You got to buy the book. All right. Everybody tonight gets a copy that I brought, but you guys at home, you got to buy your own copy. That's right. So there's a chart on here of all the tangential and radial shrinks of all the woods known to man. Well, maybe not all of them, but many of them. What is interesting is many people have done what we're going to do, and a discussion always comes up about madrone, because we all know that madrone moves an incredible amount. When you shrink it, it shrinks up like an orange peel would if it dried out, just crazy ways. It actually has more tangential shrink. So this shagbark hickory we're going to use is 11 something, 10, 11 something. And madrone is only 12.2. So it's not that much more than this. The difference is that this wood that we're going to use, this shagbark hickory, also has a really high radial shrink. So the piece, when we're done with it, is going to turn oval, as well as something else that it's going to do that I'm not going to talk about. And you can, if you sit here long enough and look at this, you'll figure out what it's going to do. But the roundness of it when we're done will turn oval when it dries, because it's got really high radial shrink. So the radial shrink is going to make the piece squish down and turn, right, basically be oval. Of all of the woods in this list, shagbark hickory has the closest ratio to 1 of tangential shrink to radial shrink, meaning both directions it shrinks more than any other wood as a factor of the shrink itself, right? So radial shrink, tangential shrink divided by radial shrink is 1.4 in shagbark hickory. In madrone, I think it's 1.6. You can look at the chart. I can't see because I don't have my glasses on, but it's high. The ratio is higher. So it won't shrink in both directions quite as much. It only shrinks tangentially more. And I found that, I mean, that's the kind of thing when you're reading this book that you'll your head will spin and you go like, I'm going to have to read that paragraph 5 more times or whatever. That's the kind of book. This is a really detailed book about wood, and not just about how it moves, but pore structures and unbelievable pictures of magnified wood, so you can guess what it's going to do. Really great book. So is that enough of a plug for the book? He doesn't care because he doesn't get residuals. But anyway, I found this chart very interesting, and there's the next one is red oak. Red oak has really high tangential shrink and also has a fairly close to 1 ratio of tangential to, and I think it's 1.6 or something like that. So it gives you an idea of what's going to happen if you just wait long enough for the stuff to dry out, which also should tell you something else, which is that we're going to be working with green wood, and it's forced to be green because it was cut, I don't know, 2 months ago, and it's been sitting in water ever since, because it's got high tangential shrink. If I had left it out of the water, what would have happened? It would have checked up like crazy, right? Without really, and it still would have been green, but it would start checking almost instantly. So it's been sitting in water because I've been playing with it different. So we're gonna work on it today. So Barry's gonna come up, and we're gonna go through the steps. I think this has to be moved now, but it's taped on here now, so it's never coming off because we use the blue tape, which we all know is the best tape ever if you're a painter, but not if you're a whiteboard adherer. All right, so Barry, come with me. So the other discussion that happened during the break was folks were talking about how hard hickory is on tools. And I didn't, frankly, do the research I needed to do to find out why that is. I don't find the wood particularly hard, but I do find that it must have some kind of silicate in it or something, because it dulls a tool like nobody's business. So I have to thank Mike, because he brought his CBN wheel sharpener for me, because we're going to sharpen a couple times just to make sure the tools are sharp. Do you care about wood chips? You want this? No. Okay, he doesn't want this. You're going to want that. Probably. Want that? Okay, good. You can wear that. All right. So what I did was essentially, I should have left that picture up a little bit longer. So this came out of, you can see the grain on this, was a disc, right? And we just sliced the disc into 2.5 inch by 2.5 inch pieces, the length of bark to bark, okay? So you want to go just to the right or just to the left of the pith, because if you leave the true center of the pith in, it's going to crack there probably pretty easily. So I went about 1/2 inch to the left of it and cut one of these, and then I cut another one, and then I went 1/2 inch to the right of it and took out that 1 inch piece and cut one of these and cut another one, right? And in the end, when we're done, you can put these 4 objects in line and they will look like they work together, because they're all going to have the same thing happen to them. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn a tenon on this thing so that we can put it in a chuck. And And then the part that I'm not going to do, and Barry's not going to do it, but that I'll tell you about, is we have to turn a mandrel out of PVC pipe, because we're going to drill a 1 7/8" hole, and we're going to use a 2-inch piece of PVC pipe. And the reason I don't drill a 2-inch hole and use a 2-inch piece of PVC pipe is because the outside diameter isn't exactly 2 inches, and the mandrel will not work. It'll just slide off and on. So we're going to drill a 1 7/8" hole after we've mounted this in the chuck. And then we're going to, like magic, TV magic, we're going to turn a mandrel out of a piece of PVC pipe, and we're going to keep fitting that hole to the mandrel to make sure that it fits snugly, but not so snugly that you can't get it off. Now, you could use a piece of wood and turn a mandrel. You could use whatever you want. I don't care. You can turn a mandrel with whatever you want. But the key is that it has to be hollow, because you need the air in order to pull this thing off. Once we've turned it, once we've shoved it on there, the air pressure, if you use a solid piece of wood, you know, and you're snugly fitting, it's not going to slide back off, because the air pressure, the suction that's created as you pull it away from the wood, will overpower your superhuman strength. So if you use a piece of wood, which you could, you're going to want to drill through it so that the air that's coming through the tailstock will supply you with the air that's necessary to pull the piece off of the mandrel when you're done. So just know that. What? Say it again.
Short frame.
So this is bowl oriented. So what we cannot do is what? We're going to turn this round. What can we not use? What tool?
I mean, I wouldn't use a roughing gouge.
You cannot use a spindle roughing gouge. Normally, you see a piece of wood like this, and you can do the whole project with a spindle roughing gouge. This is end grain, face grain, end grain, face grain. If you use a spindle roughing gouge, it'll be across the room. Mark will have another scar. It'll pull the tool right out of your hand. So yes, we can't use a roughing gouge. So we're going to use a bowl gouge and a spindle gouge for the whole project. So no problem. The only thing you need the spindle gouge is to cut the nib off. So you're going to use a bowl gouge for almost the whole thing. I use a David Ellsworth special. Oh, this is I have tips and tricks because I didn't show them during the meeting. This is my tip. It's also a tip, and it's two kinds of tips. This is a tip, and this is a tip. So this is just shrink wrap for wire. And when I go around with gouges and I don't like them banging into each other and getting dull, I put a piece of shrink wrap on there, and I use a little hair dryer or whatever, shrink it to the gouge so it's perfectly fit, squeeze the tip so I have something to grab, and it comes on and off. Gouges are safe in the bag. So I use, this is a David Ellsworth bowl gouge. It's a Irish grind or swept back grind, whatever you want to call it. Can you hit the overhead? Maybe they can see it better. So it's got, you can see this long wing, right? Some of you, I'm sure most of you probably use a gouge like this or have had it instead of the standard 40-40. So it gives me a lot of wing space, which we're going to use later because we're going to use a shear scrape to get this thing down to the final shape. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is my personal belief is you can never have enough rare earth magnets. And so I use rare earth magnets to attach everything to my lathe so that I know where it is and I don't lose it, including sandpaper, which I clip in these little binder clips, you know, and just put it on a rare earth magnets right there for me, stacked by number, blah, blah, blah. So those are my two tips. I might have more, but that's it for now. Barry, come turn. So what we're going to do is we're going to put, the other thing I want you to know is that you're going to use the bedways to make sure that the tool rest is completely parallel to the bedways. Then, because we're going to go really thin on this when we finally get there. And in order to do that, we don't want there to be any of this motion, no waviness. We don't want any bumps. We want it straight across, right? So if we use the ways by sighting down the tool rest to the ways and getting it lined up exactly parallel to the ways, then when we ride the tool across the tool rest, it will go straight down the piece and we'll have a straight finished edge and no bump outs. That's the goal. That's our goal. So look, I did that by sight pretty well. So Barry, all you need to do is you need to sort of rough, it doesn't need to go round yet, but rough it because you got it on here, so why not? And then you're going to turn a tenon on here that is however deep that is. I don't know, 3/8 deep, and this is dovetailed, so it's got to have a dovetail in it, and you don't want to go smaller than this, or it won't be held by the right. And you're gonna turn it on that end. This end is going to be the top of the piece, and this end's going to be the bottom. So just do some roughing. When you if you feel like the tool is getting dull, just tell me and we'll sharpen it. But I don't think it will. I think you can do the roughing and the tenon without having to worry about it. It doesn't have to be perfectly round, just roughly roughed.
Roughly rough.
Roughly roughed.
I'm not going to get severe tear out.
You're going to get tear out, and you're not going to worry about it at all. Normally you worry about tear out, but we're not going to worry about tear out. And I would just advise that you don't hold the gouge with the flute at 90 degrees, but you hold it at 45 degrees and work it that way. You'll have plenty of cut. There you go. So let's make sure the speed is down, which it is, and all you have to do is pull that out, which it is, and away it goes. So the thing that I want to make sure that we do is just make sure we're good and tight. Ooh, righty tighty, lefty loosey. I don't think it's going anywhere.
What RPM are you recommending for this option?
It's the faster you can turn, the less time the meeting takes.
Okay, so again,
So just turn that to the right, and you can. I would say you don't want to be under 2,000 RPM, and that lathe will go to 3,200, and I would use all of it until the lathe starts to move. That's probably more than fast enough.
throwing water off on it.
Yeah, it's throwing water. Of course, it's a wet piece of wood that's been soaked for 2 months. Hey, Barry, just one thing to remind you of. We want to preserve the bark on the headstock end. So when you're roughing it, come in. No, we're not going to leave it. We're going to. Yeah, you want to come in this way so we don't pull that bark off when you go that way, right? Normally, when you rough, you're going to rough from the middle to the outside, maybe. But in this case, we just want to rough this way from that end. I don't care what you do on this end because that end's going away, but that end we're trying to preserve. So so turn off the lathe, please. Yeah, safety first. I don't want to get any lawsuits because I let you move the tool rest while you're. And you might want to move it in a smidge so you don't have to move it later, although I don't know what that other end's looking like. I should have named this How Not to Do a Demo. It's actually got someone else to turn. Isn't that wonderful? He's aiming for a straight cylinder, but he doesn't have to roughly rough this at all. He just needs, we're just taking off the corners. That's perfect. Don't worry about it. Because there's no reason to wait. It's between centers.
I'm not going to hit this before I get this down to round.
You're not going to get it down to round. That's why I said you're going to turn it roughly. You're not getting it down to round. You're just taking off the corners.
Oh.
Just going to make it easier later. Needs to be, you need to bolt it into the floor. So you could you could wait till you get this on the mandrel and then turn it down to round, but you got it between centers, so why not do some of the roughing now? It'll save time later, and it's more stable now than it will be when it's in the mandrel. All right, so that's probably good. So now just put a tenon on there that is, you know, slightly less than a ½ inch deep. And it has a dovetail in it that's about 15 degrees. Huh? So do you want me to do that? Because I can do that. All right. I can do that. Wow, your head's bigger than my head. Wait a minute, I wasn't supposed to do any turning. Stay. Good tool, good tool. It's a little high. So I have a robust, and it has mostly, the tool rest is mostly the 1 inch bar center, and it's really low. So this is, getting used to this is a little weird. The disclaimer about somebody else's lathe. So this is where you said you would use a scraper. I'm going to use parting gouge just to make it quick. Actually, so here's another tip. So if you take your parting gouge, can you do a overhead so it can be closer? Let me see how I can make this work. Can you zoom this or no? Oh, because we don't have a camera operator. Okay, I'll bring it up to you. If you take your parting gouge and instead of making a flush 90-degree cut, you grind it with the degrees of your dovetail, then when you go in, your dovetail's already created. You don't have to do that weird thing in the corner. You know how you do that with if you're used to using a detail gouge to make your corner perfect. If you use this method, you can just go straight in and the dovetail's made for you, and the wall, the shoulder is perfectly square to the dovetail. So that's what we're going to do. Just by going straight in with that parting gouge, because it's already ground with that bevel on it, it's going to create the dovetail for me without me having to do anything.
Another tip.
Another tip that has to do with a tip. I don't talk about handles at all, just tips. Just tips. Okay, so there we have basically our, and I'm going to use the other parting tool just to cut off the nib. All right. So there's no turning in this next step. Does anyone want to do it? Tell me your name, Mike. Alan? Alan Miller is our next victim. So now we're going to bore a hole in this thing. And before we bore a hole in it, we're going to mount it in that dovetail. And it's green wood. So we're going to not only make sure that it's tight, but that we check it every once in a while as we're doing, as it's turning, as it's spinning. I mean, we're going to turn it off. We're not going to check it as it's spinning. I take that back. But while we're working with it, we're going to constantly want to monitor just to make sure the tailstock hasn't slid and nothing bad is going to happen. I have found that even when this is soaking wet, you can clamp down on this pretty hard and it doesn't move much. It doesn't compress very much. It's pretty tight growth. But it can't hurt, right? Safety first, can't hurt. And they say that you only have to turn one side of this. And then everyone else says, but I do both sides. And I only used to do one side, and now I do both sides because everyone says they do both sides, and I like to be like everyone. Don't like to be an outlier. Yeah, I don't like to be a liar of any kind. I'm a moral person, so out or otherwise. So the reason obviously the reason I brought the tailstock up was because I want this to be perfectly centered just the way it was when Barry so graciously turned it for us. And I don't want it to be off center because there's not a whole lot. I turn this to 2.5 inches. We're going down to 2 inches on the outside diameter. So there's enough play, but I don't want so much, I don't want so much that we got it. It's not it's not a multi-axis turning, let's put it that way. So we can, now we're tight in there, we can back this off. And it's not going anywhere, that's good. With the Forstner already attached. So we're gonna use a Forstner bit to drill into this. And we're gonna advance no more than 3/8 of an inch before we pull it out and clear it. The key is we can't pull it out all the way. You can pull it all the way out and reinsert it. But every time you do that, it starts with a different insertion point because this is where all the flex is. So my trick is I leave that, can you do an overhead shot again, please? I leave that Jacobs chuck in the inside, and I only pull it out to the very rim. All the chips clear, you can see the blue of the Jacobs chuck, and you can go back in, and you're not having to reset the Forstner bit. And so you're not going to have ridges inside. You're going to have one smooth tunnel. This Forstner bit, I haven't owned one like this before. It's pretty cool. It's got that stupid point that they all have. So we have to take that into account when we're going down to the bottom. But it also, instead of having the teeth around the outside, it has only 2 clearing wedges. So it creates a really, it sort of creates a guide for the,
Is that a grizzly?
It is a Roman carbide.
Yeah.
It's got a little Spartan on it. Is that made by Grizzly?
It's sold by Grizzly.
Okay. Yeah, so I really like it because the blades are what's doing all the work, and these teeth are just getting in the way. So these just make a wedge clearing, and then in you go. You could grind the point off. There's no reason to have the point unless you like that little divot in the bottom on the inside of your pieces, and I like that divot, so I leave my points on. That's like a belly button. I think that it is proud of the wedges, though, so it does give you an initial set point that should be in the center. And I wonder if you ground it off, if there'd be some wiggle before the wedges hit the. Yeah. Yeah. So I know the spade bits, you've done it. So the spade bits you can grind the tip off of because it's the outer edge that's doing the cutting. But this, you're wanting to set those blades, they're going on the radius of the bit. So I think they must have put it there for a reason. So I'm going to leave it there. And I paid for it. I hate to just throw it away. Some portion of my money went to that poor point. Okay, So you're going to come up here. Do you want this? Because you're, oh no, you're not going to get anything on that sweater. Nothing's going to be on that sweater at all. So when we start this, we want to ease in because we want to preserve the bark up here. So that's going to be pretty. So we want to ease in. The key is we're going to have to put this bit on an extension eventually to get all the way down this 13 inches or whatever it is. And we want that to be as stable as possible. So we're gonna, when we put it on the extension, we're gonna use as little of the quill as we need to use so that we get the most stability in the drilling so that the drill is as true as possible, right? That way you don't have to sand, yeah.
Give any kind of rule of thumb for RPM versus bit diameter?
Oh, sorry. So Barry asked if I have a rule of thumb as to the RPM of the spinning machine and the diameter of the Forstner bit. And I think you should drill as slowly as you can possibly drill and still not use up all your life. Because it's the heat, we don't want heat because this wood, right? As we know, this wood has a lot of movement, so the heat could crack it. So we don't want a lot of heat. And the drill will do its work slow or fast. So unless you got somewhere to be later tonight, let's go slow. That's what I would say. Let's get this out of the way. All right, so we're gonna snug this up so that the point is actually touching the wood, okay? When you get to the edge pieces, if you do this and you cut this slab of wood and you've got these two towers in the middle, the bark on those, on the outer edge of those is usually pretty perpendicular to the wood. But as you go to the outside, now the top is like this. So setting that bit against the top, the point against the top doesn't work because the point will be here and the piece will be here. So then you got to creep up on it. I haven't had any problem with the bit being true because I have a really short bit and I'm not using much of the quill. So you'll see every time we crank 3 times and we back this out, we're going to reverse crank, bring the quill back in, and then move the drill further in until we can't, until we're hitting the tailstock. Because this bit is wide enough that the Jacob's chuck will go all the way in. So we're just trying to keep stability as great as possible. Okay, so we're going to go slow, and we're going to make this as tight, and you're going to crank that. Initially, you can go in you can do more than 3 cranks or 4 cranks. We can go in a fair ways. It's just as once the chips stop clearing so you'll see the chips clear. As long as the chips are clearing, feel free to go in further. So Carol asked if we can start with the Forstner bit against the wood, and I am simply putting the point against the wood. I'm not putting the blades against the wood. I'm not putting the wings against the wood, just the point, okay? It's a good thing I didn't grind it off, or I would have to put a pin in the wood to get into the belly button of the Forstner bit and then go forward. So yeah, good thing I didn't grind it off. Okay, so you're gonna crank. And right now we're going about 600 RPM, which is maybe a bit fast. 500 seems like a reasonable speed. And so the bit is automatically clearing the chips for us, so we don't need to worry about it yet. Once they stop coming out at this rate, we'll stop going forward and we'll back up. We're not going to stop the lathe until we need to move to the bigger extension. We're going to keep the lathe running the whole time. And when you back it out, so I can see how they're not clearing as well. So now what I would do is I'd back up half a crank. That's it, just half crank. And then loosen the tailstock and pull it back and come over here. And you'll see, oh, they're still clearing. So there were no chips in there. So now, see how I don't pull the Forstner bit all the way out? I don't want it to have to reset because this is 13 inches long and it's being held by 2 inches here or 2.5 inches. If I pull this all the way out, the wood at the end will wiggle invariably. There's nothing you can do about it. And then you'll try to reset the drill and you won't get a circle, you'll get ellipse. We don't want an ellipse. We don't want any ellipse or an ellipse.
What size bit is that again?
It's 1 7/8 because a 2-inch piece of PVC outside diameter is not 2 inches. So if you used a 2-inch bit, you'd have a hole that was too big to be held by a 2-inch piece of PVC. So I'm using 1 7/8, and that's why we have to turn the PVC outside diameter to fit the hole that we're drilling. So see, I'm backing it up Where are you? Where'd you go? I'm backing it up. I'm getting the quill as far back into the tailstock as I can because I want as much stability in the bit. And I'm just going to advance the quill until I can hear it cut, or the tailstock until I can hear it cut. Then I'll set the tailstock and then you'll crank some more. Oh, they're still clearing pretty well. They're clearing really well, actually.
I think you should hold the chuck when you back out of that. If that chuck comes out of the Morris taper.
So, okay, yeah, so that's a good point. So you backed it up and you can lift this and you can pull it out. Let me just turn this off. So the comment was, you should hold this when you're backing up. And I say, absolutely not. This has a bunch of teeth on it. And if it decides to spin, I'm gonna have blood all over my hands. I do not recommend that at all. You can do it. I don't have all of my answers are not the best ones, but if that does start to move, the torque on this is gonna grab that and I'm not gonna be able to stop it. I'm a strong guy, I'm not gonna be able to stop it. So instead of that, what we do is we don't back the quill up to the loosening point of the Morris taper, right? And when I set this, I cranked it in hard this way. The other thing you could do is when you set the Jacob chucks, I already had the drill bit in there, but you could put the Jacob's chuck in the tailstock quill, and you could take a mallet and bang it in there if you wanted to. That would keep it set. The other thing is, you know how they have those quill cleaners? You know, that's the tailstock cleaner. You have the headstock one, and you can put a quill cleaner in there, and it's like an eraser. It's like a rubber thing. You can twist it and get all the gunk. The gunk is what's causing the friction holding the Morse taper in there. It's like, what David Ellsworth, when David Ellsworth uses a faceplate, he lets it rust because he believes that just that extra grip from the rusted surface of the faceplate, if the screws start to come loose, will keep the friction and the bond. Same thing is true. I mean, I wouldn't let this rust, but I've cranked it in there good and hard. And
Comment in the chat pointing out you could use a drawbar as well.
You could use a drawbar. Boy, that sounds like a lot of trouble though. I prefer to just hope that it doesn't start spinning. And if it does start spinning, I can always turn off the lathe. But remember, we're not pulling this all the way out. So even if it starts spinning, it's never gonna back out and come flying off because we're not pulling it out of the hole. It can only start spinning and go further into the hole, which it would not do. It would wanna back out. So I think we're good. So remember, when we back up, can you do the overhead shot for a sec? There's a point at which you reverse the quill into the tailstock and the Morse taper will loosen automatically. You don't want to reach that point. You want this Morse taper to be solid the whole time. So I'm saying, I know that point is usually about 3/4 of an inch, and I'm easily 1.25 inches here. So I'm not going to go farther in than this, and we'll just leave it at that. We'll shove that in until it won't go anymore. We'll tighten it down and do your work. Okay, so now we're gonna leave it moving. You're gonna lift that handle. You're gonna hold this, and you're gonna pull there and here so that it backs out. Whoops! See now that guy made a liar of me right there, and that's because we went too far and we trapped the bit in there. So we're gonna do some slow pull, and we'll reset it. That should not go anywhere. So just remember, we got to pull this out before it gets clogged up. Okay. All right. So sooner rather than later, and only do 3.5 turns at most. Okay. All right. Crank. 1, 2, 3 is there. Okay. Now loosen that up. Pull it out stably because this will wobble and you don't want it to wobble. Yeah. Perfect. And see blue, and then you can push it in, crank back so that we're going back to the 1.25 inches. Okay, then push it all the way in. Yep, and lock it down and crank some more. And then reverse half. Yep, exactly. Pull out slowly. Whoop, not too much, not too much. There you go. Yeah, oh yeah, it'll fit in. Now the one thing you didn't do is back the quill up, so it's okay. Back this up.
Yep.
Yep, loosen now, push it in till it hits the wood, then back the quill up and push it in some more, then lock it down and move forward. Once it engages, that's when you start counting. 1, 2, 3 and a half. Up, back it up. There you go. Loosen. So this is the monotonous part, but it's worth the trip. Huh? Nice people wouldn't say boring, Matthew. He is boring. That's true. That's another tip. So remember, once you back the quill up, you got to push it in farther. There you go. Yeah. Michael, who doesn't have a mic with him, Mike wants to know, could you bore by simply pushing the tailstock? The action of pushing the tailstock would bore, but I don't know that it would be true because the tailstock is moving. So setting the tailstock is giving you the truest inside diameter, which we want because we're going to put it on a mandrel, and we're going to turn it really thin. So you really don't want the Forstner bit to jiggle in there at all. So like, yes, you could just keep pushing and it would drill. Good, so push in a little bit. Yep, crank this tailstock back. Good, push in all the way. Tighten down, crank, 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 crank. 1, 2, 3, back up. Good, good. Ah, yep, good. So it's back up. So you see the blue, clear the chips, move forward, then back the tailstock up, then move forward again till you engage the wood, then lock the tailstock and start drilling. Over and over repeatedly for what is going to be 13 inches. What is the function of the PVC pipe? Barry wants to know. So it carries any liquid from one place to it's going to act as a mandrel. So we're going to slide this piece, we're going to reverse it and slide it on this mandrel so we can turn the outside to a very thin diameter while it's being supported. If we turned to a 32nd of an inch diameter on this without a mandrel, just coming off the chuck, it would rip apart. It would just, it's prone to high movement, right? So there might be checking and it'll just fall apart. So we're using the mandrel to support the inside diameter while we're turning the outside diameter. Tired yet? Makes a hell of a mess too. But you do get these nice curly shavings, which Carol would use in a piece of art. She would turn them into, I don't know, maybe Jim Kelly could use them as like curly fries for his hamburger, for his turned hamburger.
Earrings.
Earrings, yeah. Good. Now this is, can you do an overhead shot, John? This is where you have to recognize that the tailstock is eventually going to hit this piece of wood. So we don't get to do that anymore, what you just did. We're going to have to watch and not shove this in, because once that bangs, the whole show is done and we're over for the night. I mean, so if you want to get out of here quicker.
How many turns do I get?
You go three turns, just like you used to, 3.5, whatever.
Okay.
Okay, and you're going to lift it and back out. But what you're not going to do is jam it in there. Yeah, you're going to just stay where the quill is now. Was it tight? Is it tight?
It's tight.
Yeah, so we went one turn too many.
Oh, that comes. I think it's locked down. Yeah.
So let them clear. Good. So now we're not going to go back with the tailstock. We're going to, as we sneak it up, we're going to make sure that we don't hit the tailstock. But we do want to go as far as we can, okay, because we're trying to use the stability. So we're going to try to speed it up here. Y'all are going to be watching hollowing for. What most people do, they hollow for their whole demo. We're only hollowing for a third of it. And it helps if you're not retired. when you do this, because if you're retired, you got all kinds of time and this can go really slow. But when you're not retired, you got to get in the shop, you got to make your thing. So you got to figure out the fastest way to do it. You get really good at counting to 3.5. Interestingly, the quill on my Robust has measurements on it, and this quill doesn't. I assume it has a place, Mike, where it says stop or something. No, it'll just fly out of the machine. Do you know how long it is? And if you do it fast enough, you get a rhythm so you can hear when you've done 3.5. You don't even have to count. You can hear 1, 2, 3, 4. It sort of says 1, 2, 3, 4. The other thing you have to remember is if you do the 2 outside pieces, they're significantly shorter. So the quill and the Forstner bit might actually get to the bottom of those pieces before you even need the extension. This one's 13 inches long, and I don't think we're going to get there. But I don't know how far we are now, which is why this handy dandy measuring tape comes into play. So I'm going to measure this piece, but I have to make sure that I measure. Can you hit the overhead? I have to make sure that I measure the highest side, right at the highest side. If I measure at the lowest side, we'll bottom out. It'll become that coffee cup without a handle. So big, long coffee cup without a handle. So I'm going to measure from the high side, and that's 12.5 inches. A little bit more, because when this is spinning, that's my sight line, right? This topmost piece creates the visual line that I see when this is spinning. Okay, see that becomes a sort of a plane. So we're going to measure from there. It's 12 5/8, and I'm going to leave a 1/2 inch down here because I'm going to make the bottom concave so that when it shrinks, which it's going to do, it's still sitting on just a rim and it's not going to fall over. Right, so we're going to go in 12. We're going to go in 12 inches. That's how deep we have to bore this. And right now, Matt is bored way beyond 12 inches, but we're bored at 9 1/4, just for fun. Oh, it does have marks on it. You just can barely see them because Rick Baker used it so much. Wow, my quill is only 4 inches. This quill is, and it doesn't have a stop, Mike, just so you know. But you can go to 4.5 inches. So if I measure this, how much of this can we do without even adding the extension? We can go to 10.25 inches, which we should do because it's going to be more stable this way than the other way. So that's what we'll do. We'll just keep going. And so this is a good indication of how true this is and how true that hole was. Didn't catch it all on the edge. We just slid right in, right? That's good. That's what we want. What quality should the wood have or not have to do what we're doing? And the key quality of the wood is high tangential shrink and interesting grain.
I don't mean to demonstrate the shrink. I mean to make
high tangential shrink. You'll see in a minute. Got to be patient. That's the only quality. That's why we picked this wood. It's the only quality that we care about in doing what we're doing. All right, so that's as far as we can go with the quill. We're going to clear the chips before we turn the lathe off. And we're going to turn the lathe off before we fully evacuate the bit. Feels like Three Stooges movie now.
oh, throw.
Or give me faster arms. Or Barry, if you could connect it to some kind of a geared thing where someone in the audience can crank it from way back there, that'd be good. All right. So one thing I would say, because shagbark hickory really dulls tools, if we weren't pressed for time, now while I'm thinking of it, would be a good time for me to take the diamond hone and sharpen the blades on here so that the next time I go to use it, I remember that it's, I don't have to worry about whether it's sharp or not. When you sharpen a Forstner bit, you don't sharpen across the top. You don't sharpen, let's see if I can do this, across this way. You sharpen down the face of the blade, and that'll hone and bring this up back to quite sharp. But I don't think we need to do it yet because it's cutting great. All right, so now I know that what I want, how many inches did I say? 12 inches even, right? So I know I want 12 inches of depth. So, boy, it'd be nice to have a tilt away on this, wouldn't it? That'd be nice. So once I get it set, I'm going to measure up from the point 12 inches, not from the blades, but from that annoying point in the middle. Because, oh, would it be sad if it was perfectly turned and that little point came through at the end? That would really suck. All right, so that's tight. I got me magic marker, and I'm going to measure 12 inches from the point, which also on these, just so you know, these wings are not proud or flush with the point. The point is proud of the whole thing. So you got to go to the point. Yay, and I'm going to measure 12 inches, and that's right to the teeth. So I'm going to, as I go in, I'm going to stop when we get to the teeth, all right? And then I'll know that we're deep enough. Yet not too deep. I'm stopping when bark's really spinning, it's making a 90 degree, and I'm stopping at the high point there. Yeah. So when these teeth come to this top, that's when we're going to stop. Gotta get my rhythm back. Oh, one thing I didn't mention was when I put this drill back in here, I manually set it. So I didn't try to just cram it in there because I knew once I had reset on the extension and all of that, that bit was going to be somewhere north or south of the center line. I'm going to do it just so you see. So did you hear that, right? That's this flexing. So when I reset this and I put it on here and I put it back in here and I put it in there, there's a lot of variables in there. And I assume this isn't true like it was when we pulled it out when it was on the short leg. So I put it up there and it got stuck and I sort of manipulated it so I could get it to flow into the hole. So now I know it's true again, all right? So I went 5 and that was almost not coming out. That was 4, and I think 4 is okay. I'm going to sight those teeth to that spinning edge. On the camera, it looks like it's not going as fast as it's going, but in real life, you can see a straight line. I mean, the camera's real life too. You know what I mean? In person, in situ, as they say. So now I'm super close. And that's it. We've now gotten our depth. I'm going to clear. I'm going to keep the bit in just at the edge of the piece and turn the lathe off because what I don't want is as I pull this out, I don't want it to flex and bang that hole open wider. Woo! Everything else on this is electronic. They should have a button you push and it's just right. That'll also help me if I lock it down. So when you all do your demos up here, there's a really nice thing that happens. The lathe vibrates on the floor and you get this really nice foot massage as you do demo. Doesn't happen in most places, I don't believe. All right, so now we've got it hollowed out. We're going to pull it off. We're going to put our mandrel, which has been previously, through the magic of television, baked. The other thing I got to do now is I need to cut that off. Because I guess I don't need to cut it off. I'm going to choose to cut it off so that I can get the most stable surface possible. But what I don't want to lose is that center point. So if we lose the center point, all is lost because you'll see that, bless you. Don't be sorry. Sneeze away. Do you need a tissue? Can I?
No. Tissue, I'd rather know.
You brought her you tissue. No, that doesn't work. All right, so when you're turning this mandrel, so this is a 2-inch piece of PVC pipe through the magic of, hey, Mike, can you make time go backwards, please? You know how you do that. Make time, yeah. Through the magic of Mike making time go backwards, this is a 2-inch piece of PVC pipe. And I want it to be completely centered. This is the step we're not going to do, but I'm going to show you how to do it. So we're going to put a cone center on our live. See how that moved? Let's say it was there. Put that cone center in. Now I know that the PVC pipe is centered, so I can tighten it down in the chuck. And not only will I do this when I turn the mandrel diameter, but I'm going to do it now when we use it as a mandrel because I want that piece to be centered. Yeah, so Mike asked me if I dovetailed my mandrel to meet these jaws, and I didn't because this PVC pipe just barely closes in on these jaws, and if I put a dovetail in it, it would just wobble all over. And I didn't bring my smaller jaws. But if you could see this tailstock now, it is almost locked complete. It's almost completely locked. But it doesn't matter what.
Sorry.
No problem. You need the crying room, the sneezing room. We're going to put pressure against this piece on the mandrel. So it doesn't, the only reason we need this to engage is so that this will spin and not spin inside the chuck, right? So it doesn't have to be like when you do your wood, you want to keep a, what is it, 1/8 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch space between the jaws, and your chuck is where the perfect round is in most chucks. So we're tightening down farther than that. It doesn't matter. It's not important. So now we know we have this centered. And what I would do is turn this down to diameter, right? And the way I would do that is I would start turning it. I know that this diameter is 1 7/8. So I need to turn this 2-inch piece of PVC down to 1 7/8. And it's really about a 1/16 of an inch you're going to need to take off of here. And this dulls your tools, and this obliterates them. This is a 2-hour process. Took me 2 hours. Nice thing is you only have to make it once, because once you've made it once, all you're doing is drilling holes in these and sliding them on, so you're done. But it took a long time, and I had to sharpen the tool many times because PVC just eats through the steel. I don't know why. Okay. Mark says PVC doesn't actually come round, so you want to actually cut the diameter because it's not truly spherical, circular. So I cut it down. I use calipers to make sure that it's all the right diameter. And then I use 400 grit sandpaper. And I know this guy who makes food safe, no, not friction polish, that other stuff, abrasive paste. And so I give it a little 400 grit and a little abrasive paste. And then I wipe the abrasive paste off. And then I also know this guy who makes a beautiful friction polish that was free to me and food safe, because who knows when I'm going to eat off of this. And I give it a little friction polish just so that it's really, I'm not going to have to worry about this sticking in there, but not so smooth that I have to worry about it sliding out. And I'm not taking so much off that I'm changing the diameter just to make it nice and smooth. Baby's bottom.
Of all those products,
Shh. I was hoping to pocket that box and just walk out. Yeah, they're on to me. They know my character. It's worth a box of friction polish. So if you missed Matt's demo last month, you missed a great one because he brought snacks, 3 different varieties of snacks. He didn't have handouts, but he had handout at the end, which was all the stuff he made. He gave us all samples of. And I've been using that stuff for the last month, and it's awesome. So, don't make your own, just ask Matt to make some for you. So since I'm going to cut this off and I need to know exactly the center, I'm just going to give myself permission to, oh, look at that, it's going to fall off for me. That's perfect. Permission to relocate, or not to relocate the center, but to give myself that center. And then I'm going to get rid of the excess here. So I still have a hole that I can put in there to center this up once we get it on the mandrel. Because even though we centered the mandrel and tightened it down, it's PVC, so the minute you slide this on it, it's gonna start moving. Look, boy, it'd sure be nice to have a tilt-away on this, wouldn't it? Wouldn't have had to do that at all. You can only do 13-inch pieces. So you can see this is catching every once in a while, which means I didn't perfectly do the surface. So I'm gonna pound it on there. And that's solid. Anyone want to turn this around? Anybody dying to, no, all right, fine. So here's where it's really important to get the tool rest parallel to the bedways by sighting down. Because, and I'm actually going to change out this tool rest because this tool rest is just an angle, and that's not going to, oh, I guess it has a little lip here for my finger. I'll try that. I'm willing to try that. You want to be able to put your finger, can you do the overhead? On the tool rest to guide the tool across so that you're not going in and out, because you're perfectly parallel. So we've set the ways, or we've set the tool rest, we sighted it down, it's not perfectly parallel, so I'm gonna just move it a slight bit. I'm probably more anal about this part than I should be. I'm gonna tighten it down. Now, if I set the tool and I set my finger underneath the lip of the rest, and I keep the tool not advancing on that finger, but staying right where that is, theoretically, I should be able to cut a perfectly parallel line, right? Because the tool rest is parallel if the tool doesn't move in and out. And so the key to not moving the tool in and out for me, and I don't know, I was going to ask if anybody knows what the key to not moving the tool in and out is the key for me is to make sure that the pressure is down on the tool only. So any pressure that I put on the gouge is going to be down onto the tool rest. And that when I'm moving back and forth, I'm not using my arms to do it, because your arms are radiuses, right? And they swing in an arc. So any movement of your arms alone, because of the body mechanics, is going to swing in an arc, and we can't have that. We need perfectly parallel. So I'm going to take a wide stance, and then I'm just going to start to lean in, and I'm going to use my knees to lean and push across the piece, okay? And I am going to change this tool rest out because it's too wide. And I know that I'm going to slide on it, and the angle is really steep, and you have to take that angle. So I'm going to take my own angle on my own tool rest. Yeah, so Carol wanted to know why it was too long, and what I'm talking about is this flat is angled up quite severely when it's in the rest, and I was afraid with my finger under the lip, so there's a lip here for your finger, with my finger under the lip, the tool was going to want to ride that angle, and I want the tool more perpendicular, and I wasn't going to be able to get my finger in a place that was stable enough that as I rode across, it wouldn't slip in and out, because it would have to be on this flat, and there's nothing to keep it from doing this on this flat. Whereas my tool rest has which is a robust tool rest, has a bead at the top, and I can ride that bead, and the tool is simply, let me see if I can show you. Can you show me the front angle? So with the tool rest that comes with this machine, the tool would be angled thusly, and if I wanted it this way, there's not enough room for my finger, whoops, oh, this is hard to do, where see that curve? This curve here is where your finger rests, so there's an inch between that curve and where the gouge is. So I wouldn't have good contact with the gouge on my finger, and my finger is my guide. So with this tool rest, there is no loop for your finger, and there's just a straight, there's no angle. It's a round surface, so you can have it at whatever angle you want, and my finger can be tight up into that gouge and at 90 degrees to the work instead of at 60 degrees or whatever this is. Does that make sense? It's it's about personal comfort. I bet if you have this lathe and you've used that tool rest, it will work for you. But we're going to go down really thin, and I don't want to have to be embarrassed by the piece flying apart. because I know that doesn't happen to any of you guys, and that would look really bad if it flew apart on me. All right, the only other thing I'm going to say is we want to start here and move this way because we want to preserve this bark. So I want to cut into the bark while the wood is supporting it. If I come this way, the wood's not supporting the bark as I'm cutting it, and it's likely to just peel off. Okay, we want it to stay there. All right, so again, we can turn as fast as we want. As long as the machine doesn't walk, we're good. So did you all hear about 3 inches in, it started to go, did you hear that? So that was me accidentally, not intentionally, putting inward pressure on. And why did that happen? Because I didn't do what I told you, which I was going to do, which is take a wide stance and use my body. I started using my arms and just that little bit of pressure. And what that did was, well, it's not round yet, so it's not too bad. But what that normally would do is create these ridges. You guys, if you've seen those on your work, or these burnishing marks, as I call them, where you've been pressing into the wood. So you got to take your own advice and use your body, not your arms. The other thing that's really important to do, so we often talk about riding the bevel, right? And we rarely, if you look at your own turning and you pay attention while you're turning, you're rarely riding the bevel all the way. When we're trying to make this perfectly parallel and even across the surface, it's really important to, can you do it? Yeah, to make sure that this edge here is riding, the whole width is riding on the wood. There's no gap. Let's see if we, there's no, it's hard to visualize this. There's no gap, so you can see a gap there, and now it's flush to the surface. We don't want this gap because that's going to bring the tool into the wood, and that we're not going to have parallel. So we want to keep the bevel parallel to the direction we're headed, and gliding along the wood, not riding, not rubbing, just gliding there. So you're maintaining the position. Once you set the position, it's not so important that the bevel be in contact with the wood, but that you're able to maintain the position you're in. And the best way to do that is if the bevel is in contact with the wood, okay? So I'm using that ghosting that you can't see probably on the television camera, but you know that ghost image you get where the wood is not perfectly round? And I'm rough cutting down to get that ghost out of the way, and then we'll really worry about thinness. I don't work with a Powermatic. This thing is in the way. How do you get this out of the way? You gotta like sand it down, the belt sander to it or something? It's really in the way.
Just what you're used to.
So I'm going to slow down just to see what our diameter here is. I think there's still plenty of wood here, plenty of wood. So I can take another pass. I don't need to worry about that yet. I want to get the tool as dull as possible before I sharpen it. So that time I pulled away because I again started using my arms. Remember, we're anchoring the tool with our finger and then not letting the tool move. except in that direction. That direction. All right, so a couple of things that I like to pay attention to when I'm critiquing my own stuff is, so I'm moving the body, I'm not moving the arms. If I pull away, if I start leaning, I lose my balance. I'm gonna come away and I'm gonna do, you saw me a couple times pull off the wood because I lost my balance. So you wanna make sure you're centered so you have your balance. And then the other trick, the other thing you gotta remember is, where's this back hand? Where's that angle of attack that's gonna keep the bevel? So like if I were to really ride this bevel, I would have to start way back here and my body would have to be twisted because this sucker's in the way. Because I can't get this across my hip. Now I could do what Mike says, which is like, why are you getting in your own way? Just hold the tool on the other side and you could work it that way, right? And I could, but I'm right-handed and I'm prone to turning with my right hand and I probably should get better about doing this. And then this wouldn't be in the way. With my lathe, this isn't in the way. My tool rest is actually pretty darn straight, but you know, I could tell because the gap was growing between the tool rest and the wood. But it's okay because I still got quite a bit to take off there, I think. Let's find out. It's good to know because last thing you want to do is go through the whole demo and then get through. Yeah, I'm at 217, so I'm okay. I'm still okay down here. I'm gonna take this off. Unfortunately, I need a. Would someone like to buy me a 14-inch tool rest? Because a 12-inch isn't quite long enough for this.
Yeah, that Powermatic one is 14 inches long.
Haha. Should have known. So the other reason I went in is the tool's starting to get dull, so I started to use brute force. And that ends up invariably making you push. And I can even feel myself doing it. So I think a lot of times we turn and we're not paying attention when we're turning, we're just getting the project done. And we'd probably be a lot better turners if we were analytical about it as it was happening. So one thing I just did that I didn't want to do was I lowered the diameter past the dovetail. At this point, the dovetail tells me where the bottom of the piece is. But I remember that we said 12 inches was what we bored to. So just to remind myself, it's 13 inches piece and I want 12.5 inches. So I have a ½ inch to take off here and I can, just so that I don't make a funnel after you've been so patient. So that tells you how dull this tool got just cutting once. So that tenon is no longer important, so I'm going to get it out of the way so we can turn down to our final diameter and take the tenon off. And I got another little bit to go. So that should be good. Again, I don't want this to tear out, so I'm going to go back and do a little pull cut so that bottom corner will be nice and square. Now this is pretty round, so I feel safe moving the tool rest even with the lathe on. though they tell me that's not what you're supposed to do. I have a authority problem. And admitting you have it, I think, is the first step to recovering. So also what you want to do is remember, when you're turning, you're not looking at the tip of the gouge, you're setting the gouge tip, and then you're looking at the top of the piece over the horizon, because that's where you'll start to see if you're wavy. If you're looking at the tip of the tool touching the wood, you won't notice those waves until it's too late. When you do this, you can choose how thin or thick you want the piece. The thinner you go, the more movement there's going to be in the final product. And then there's going to be something else that's going to be easier to do that I'll show you when I'm done, because I've already got it done. Not going to show you how to do it, just show you the piece. So this tool is getting pretty dull. I can feel it. The work is harder. So after this pass, I'm going to sharpen it. Might not even make it through this pass. And then we'll be able to get to the end, I think. Oh, another tip that has to do with the tip. If you have, I don't know if you guys use David Ellsworth's Irish grind, he makes a jig for it. This is that jig. If you have the Wolverine jig, take that end and round it off on your grinder to a point, because when you're in that corner and you turn that jig to where the, it's only round in this diameter, it's flat in this diameter. When you get to that flat, you get a hitch. So the first thing you should do is grind the tip of these, and I ground the tip of this too, so it sits in that triangle and just pivots nicely. And I want to thank Mike Kutterbach for hauling his portable CBN wheels in here for me so that I could do that sharpening. Man, there's nothing better than a sharp tool. Did you see the color change on the wood? Crazy. So the last thing I want to do is go through this piece at this point. So I'm just going to check it. It's looking pretty good up here. There's a high spot there and we're thin there. So we need to really come down to that and then we'll be perfect. Unfortunately, it's at the opposite end of the piece, but we'll make it work. All right. One last little bit, and then we're gonna, thank you. Then we're gonna switch the blade angle on the gouge to use those wings to do a shear scrape. Just to get rid of, since we're dealing with the end grain, just to get rid of any tear out. And to make it even, here's where that other tool rest will be fine because we want a steep angle and it's a 14-inch blade, evidently, so I'm told. So I'm going to take the blade and I'm going to close it basically parallel to the piece, and it doesn't even matter. You could do this with the top wing or you could do it with the bottom wing. The handle's going to be way down, so the tool's at about 45 degrees. And I'm going to slowly bring the handle up and engage, and these little wispy angel hairs are going to come off. And I'm just going to clean that up. Pushing down on the tool rest, not into the piece. When you're doing this cut, it's really easy to push into the piece because the blade is flush with the piece, so it's really easy to start leaning this way. You got to keep the tool rest, or keep the pressure down on the piece. Or sorry, down on the tool rest, not down on the piece. And just bring it across. Just shear scrape some of those ridges away from that end grain. I'm not going to go off the edge because I don't want to tear up that corner. So that's good. What I would normally do now is sand this down to whatever grit I want, put whatever finish I want on it, be done with it, and then cut off the end here. Everybody knows what cutting off a tenon looks like? Yeah. I haven't found that, but I'm not using any significant finish. I'm using like a, friction polish, something like that. So it's wax and whatever else. So I don't think that's changing. That's keeping it from what's going to happen. The only thing, I'm not going to spend time turning the tenon off, but the only thing you want to do is you want to make sure that bottom is concave to about a 1/16 or a 32nd of an inch from the outside rim, and then concave, which is why we left that 1/2 inch on the bottom of this piece. If you leave more than a 1/2 inch, I've been told, and now I haven't learned this from personal experience, but if you leave more than a 1/2 inch, you drill down to an inch, the bottom cracks. So if you don't want the bottom cracked, you got to go further than, got to go deeper and leave yourself less than a 1/2 inch. And now with this concave, will be right about a 1/6 or a 1/4 of an inch. And so it won't, got to loosen this, sorry. It will not crack. Since this is on a mandrel and since I still have the centering hole, I can take this home and take the thing off. And then what this becomes, it was a long wait to get to the big reveal. But what happens is the radial shrink, overhead please. makes the piece oval, and the tangential shrink makes it lean. And if you do these right, you can book match them. These don't have any book match because I have another one I'm going to show you. And the small ones go out like this. So you have all these natural edges. Now for me, I like it when there's sapwood on the bottom and the top. So I try to make sure that I have a piece where the heartwood is small enough that there's enough sapwood to go white, dark white. And the great thing about these is if you turn them thin enough, so here's the one that was bookended and it wasn't finished. But if you turn them thin enough, you can pierce them and do all kinds of decorating. You can burn them. You can make cool patterns, and then you can give them to your friend Carol, who will paint them magically for you and turn them into really cool stuff. I imagine if you knew Mike Kutterbach, you could probably get him to give you one of his candles, one of his electric candles, which you could drop in the bottom of this, and it would light up the piece. But that's what you can do. So, and they really do. I mean, this one did a good job. This one, I was going to take this. I mean, I'm going to take this. I'm going to leave this on here because I'm going to go home and turn off the tenon. But it takes about. I found that it takes about 4 days to get them to really do this. They got to dry for about 4 days at whatever these. I mean, that one's super thin. I don't know. That's probably not even a 1/16 of an inch. So the trick is to be really parallel, so you can go as thin as you dare. And I'm sure some magic great turner could get this to a 32nd of an inch. But I think if you've done all that work and then a piece blows apart, that's no fun. So yeah, so that's why it's the tangential shrink away from the center. That's what makes the pieces bend, and it's the radial shrink that makes them go. That makes them go oval. For those of you in the audience, so the radial shrink makes them go oval. The tangential shrink makes them go like this. And so you can set them. You could set them all in one direction. You can do whatever you want. I mean, you can. They're yours. Once you make them, they're yours. You can do whatever you want with them.
I would say thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks very much for coming. Buy the book.